The global vaccine rollout and inoculations offer hope. Hope for the future, for people, for leaders, and the economy. But what are the pitfalls in the post-pandemic economic recovery? Hello, and welcome to another episode of India Budget 2021. I am Gautam Chikarmane, Vice President at Observer Research Foundation. And tonight we have with us Dr. Shamika Ravi, former member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council and India Research Director at Brookings Institution. She joins us from New Delhi. We also have with us Dr. Rajesh Parekh, Director Medical Research at Jaslok Hospital and Research Center. He joins us from Mumbai. And we finally have Professor Amos Panet, a virologist from Israel. He joins us from Jerusalem. I'm going to begin with you, Dr. Parekh. Last year, you wrote a book called Coronavirus, What You Need to Know About the Global Pandemic. Exactly a year or maybe 11 months later, you have a chapter in another book that says, Looking Beyond a Cultural Extinction Event. What has happened in this 12 months and where are we expected to be? You can start with, please tell us about that.
Gautam, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for inviting me on this program and also for inviting me to write the chapter for the book that you have edited. And I think it's quite clear by now to everybody that things are not going to be the same in the world after the pandemic. And therefore, in our book, we coined the phrase cultural extinction event to just highlight the fact that many things are going to be different post-pandemic. As we're all aware, there have been 5 major extinction events, the last of which wiped out the reptiles and the dinosaurs and made it possible for mammals and therefore for humans to succeed on this planet. And in an analogous manner, we postulated, as have many others, of course, that after the pandemic, and also to some extent during the pandemic, things have changed in a manner that will remain with us for a long, long time, if not forever.
So is the extinction of the human species happening or not?
I think we're too resilient species to become completely extinct this soon. But of course, we should not push our luck too far. We are taking steps which are detrimental not just to us, but to all other species on the planet. And I think one of the warnings of this pandemic, which we've highlighted in the chapter that has appeared in your book, is that we should now heed this warning. And if we don't, then we are taking steps which may unfortunately become irrevocable.
Dr. Panet, I will move to you now. How do you see, as a professional virologist, how do you see this change? How do you see this fight of humanity that within a year, we have already have vaccines of various kinds on the table, and now the new debate is on whether they are safe or not safe, or whether they have been tested or not tested. How do you see this debate going forward?
Okay. Good day to all viewers and listeners in India from Jerusalem. I'm happy to be here. Well, it's very hard to predict. You know, if you have asked me 2 months ago when Pfizer and Moderna came out and other companies came out with vaccines, I would have said that, the vaccines will solve the problem, at least in the short term, and we will get back to life. But in the last 2 months, we have surprised by the virus. And we viewed the virus as a virus with low rate of mutability. It doesn't make many mutations. However, because it goes through the world so fast, so many cycles of replication of the virus is mutating and mutating in different countries. And we know now of the Brazilian mutant, the English mutant, the South African mutant, and they are all overcoming the old virus as we knew it, the virus which came out of China in December of 2019. So we have developed vaccines against the original virus. All companies have developed a vaccine against the Yuan virus isolated from patient number 1. But now we have a different story. We have different viruses, and there are already reports from South Africa that the virus, the South African virus, is very resistant to antibodies against convalescent patients, people who recovered from virus, so they can theoretically at least be reinfected. And now we see in Brazil, in a city in Brazil where a new virus strain has overtaken the old virus, and people are infected for the second time. So the pandemic is not over, and we will see. We are in the midst of a vaccination program, huge vaccination program, but perhaps the virus is running too fast for us, and we may have to develop new versions of the vaccine. And I agree completely with the previous speaker. We cannot anticipate what will happen in the long term. But I'm more optimistic. We have science in our side now. You know, the Spanish influenza in 1918, we didn't know that it's a virus. We didn't know that it's a flu virus. So we were fighting it in the dark. Now we have light, at least. We have the science helping us in this fight.
So, Professor Panett, to push your analysis one step further in terms of what it means for common people, are we looking at what's the time frame that we are looking at the serial viruses and serial vaccination? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5, 10? Is it going to be is this black swan? Is all swans going to become black over the next 10 years?
You know, it's hard to be a prophet while I came from a city which is famous for its old prophets. But I would say that it might turn out to be like a flu, you know, that we'll never get rid of it. It will always be in the background, you know, but it won't be as difficult as it is now. People would not die like they die now. So we may live with it, even with vaccinations, but we'll have to be cautious. We'll have to be more careful. You know, international flights will have to be much better monitored, not like it has been. You know, you can fly from one country to the next and start live. So we will have to develop new measures of daily life. And I agree with the previous speaker. If we don't do it, and we don't come up with different directions, we may be in trouble.
So in other words, the mask is here to stay, and we'll have to make our peace with it. I move now to Dr. Shamika, Dr. Ravi. Shamika, you've been tracking this from the economics point of view through data analysis, and you've been doing the cutting-edge work on tracking the virus and how India has been faring so far. Tell us, has India done fairly well? And now that the vaccines are coming, what do you see going forward from your big data analysis?
So thank you, Gautam. Good to be here. Well, right from the beginning, I think while there was a considerable degree of fear, I would say not just amongst the common population, but also I think within the policy circuit, given the initial predictions, which were quite dire, I think there was a certain degree of urgency in a lot of the actions that were taken early on to contain the spread in India. So, for instance, we were very early, if you compare ourselves with the OECD countries, for instance, even in terms of imposing 2 weeks quarantine or imposing lots of travel restrictions, not just from China, but also from Europe, from the US, and towards the end also from the Middle East. Now, given these initial policy interventions, of course, India is a very large federal country, and eventually state governments have a big say in terms of the implementation of the Disease and Epidemics Act. But very quickly, I think state after state rallied behind the guidelines of the central government. And I think by and large, and of course, we do know, high-profile cases of actresses and big singers, etc., who jumped quarantine. But by and large, people did abide in terms of wearing mask, or the lockdown itself was very stringent. But I think, in a hindsight, we can say that India has been quite frugal and pragmatic, given the quality of public health infrastructure. There was no other way to really respond. And I think now that we are 10 months into the pandemic, we can say that we have fared fairly well. It's all too early to ever say that, look, we've done very well. Perhaps no country will come out and say that, especially after we've seen Japan, South Korea, many parts of Europe, which did get a handle on the infection. And now you have second and third waves, which are quite debilitating. In the Indian case, I think, given the large federal structure, movement of people, etc., we have seen that we were quite delayed in terms of peaking overall. And by peak, I mean that, subsequent daily numbers began to come down. But by mid-September, we did peak. And unlike most other continents and other parts of the world, that peak has stayed, the first and only peak until now. We have not seen a major resurgence. The reason I feel a little assured from the numbers is because our testing hasn't really come down since September. We have stayed around 10 lakh tests, about 1 million tests per day. And yet the daily new cases are drastically coming down. Now we are below 13,000 per day. So on the whole, I would say that in terms of the infection, we have done fairly well. The economy is the second part of, the second side of the same coin. We had a stringent lockdown, which means economic activity, if you track it in terms of just mobility or transaction, came crashing down. We were almost 85% down in terms of just movement and mobility. But since early May, once the unlockdown started, and we've had sort of 5 phases of gradual unlocking, we are seeing that now several states are back to pre-pandemic levels of economic activity and mobility. And the expectation in terms of the national economy is that the third quarter, we are likely to see a positive growth. So all in all, I think we've done fairly well.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. I'm going to come back to Dr. Parekh. Dr. Parekh, there is a phrase which is now very common known as political economy, and it has various repercussions that merge politics with the economy. Are we looking at a pandemic economy as a field, as a potential field? If viruses, if cultural extinction events or the threat of those events is going to be accompanying us day after day, do you think a new field is emerging, pandemics economics, and how do we negotiate this? One of the parts in your chapter or in your book, you have explored the economic aspects of how this virus will shape out, or how serial viruses will shape out. So how do you bring these two together? They are now just almost moving together.
Well, first of all, I do not want to feign any expertise in an area in which I'm completely an amateur. It's an interesting choice of cities that you made, Gautam. You have somebody here in Mumbai who in these matters is completely lay. You have Delhi, which is the city of experts and analysts, and Jerusalem, of course, the city of prophets. So I think somewhere between a layman's point of view and an expert's point of view and a prophetic vision at the intersection in that Venn diagram somewhere perhaps lies the truth. I can only look at these things at a micro level. Yes, people's lives are affected, the economic aspects on daily life. And let us not forget our migrant workers. Let us not forget our farmers. And at that level, I'm sure there's a certain degree of expertise, perhaps a specialized discipline, as you seem to indicate. Well, health and economics has always been there. I mean, the economics of health, I guess, has been around. There are people who have written profoundly on it. But in terms of pandemics, what is the impact of large-scale health events? They may even be epidemics on the economy. I think that's going to require a multi-expert committee. this is not a point of view that a physician or a researcher can offer. And I think you need a multidisciplinary team which arrives at some kind of consensus. But I agree with you entirely. I mean, this calls for a new look. To the best of my knowledge, there has been no large-scale studies on the impact of events like this, partly because we, haven't had such an event for 100 years. And yes, there's always scope for new disciplines within existing specialties.
Dr. Panet, how would you take that? Is health and economy, they were almost related. See, because of the health, there came the lockdowns. Because of the lockdowns, economies slowed down. Some of them shut down. Some businesses collapsed. Salaries were cut. There were so many job losses, all because of a virus. And in the recovery part, if there is no good economics behind research or behind finding the cures, etc., it will not work. How do you see the impact of the economy? How do you see the economy impacting the virus and the virus the economy?
Yeah, first, we know that all the pharmaceutical companies are doing very well now. If you see at least in their stock prices, they are going up and up and up. And I foresee, for example, India, which has a very good and extensive pharmaceutical industry, will do very well in this respect. And I expect that governments will put a lot of money into research, research into new vaccines, better vaccines, and into drugs. We don't have any good drug against the COVID-19 disease itself, people who are already hospitalized. So I would say that the economy, like it has gone in the last year, will go further and further into health-related matters, which of course are related to COVID-19. And also, as far as research is concerned, I remember in the early 80s, when the AIDS epidemic has started, the United States government put millions and millions of dollars into research for vaccines and for drugs. Well, we have failed with vaccines. Up to now, we could not develop a vaccine against the AIDS virus. However, we have very good drugs, the cocktail of drugs, and people are not dying now of AIDS like they used to die. It became a chronic disease. So the economy came back, and the economy functioned well, while there are millions and millions of people who are still infected with the virus, but they get the drugs and they live nearly normal life. So I hope that we will be able to deal with the coronavirus in a similar way that we dealt with AIDS and that we deal with influenza every year. So I think that science eventually will overcome.
Thank you.
And that's my hope. And if this is a prayer really, that governments will spend more money on research and development.
Yeah. Dr. Ravi, I will take this question one level deeper with you. On a per capita income of 2,000, India is producing vaccines, which countries that have a per capita income of 41,000 or 50,000 rupees. Of course, at an aggregate, we are the fifth largest economy. But do you see this, how do you see this economy, a low per capita, a poor nation, bringing out such cutting-edge research, and both of which are related to both the health as well as the economic aspects?
So Gautam, I think there are two basic points I'd like to make and emphasize here. One is the fact that health as an engine of growth will serve particularly well for India. Over the last 10 years or so, India has developed into a pharmaceutical powerhouse. We are seeing that in the current case of the vaccines as well. Though our fundamental research perhaps might not be at par with many of the OECD countries, But in terms of our manufacturing capabilities in the pharmaceutical space, we are, I think, at par, and the comparative advantage is there for everyone to see, even in the current pandemic. So that's number one. Of course, along with that is the fact that the global economy, even beyond the pandemic, the global economy is aging, particularly the rich countries, the OECD countries. As they age, their spending on healthcare is only going to go up. I think their dependence on economies like India, not just again for medicines, vaccines, etc., but also for human resources, for IT support. Healthcare is likely to become an engine of growth opportunity for India over the next 50 years at least. But more immediately, the second point I want to emphasize is healthcare in the current sort of pandemic within India is also leading to, there is a fear of a K-shaped recovery when we say, where our big firms are shaping up pretty well. They're far more resilient. And we have seen that also in terms of their employment numbers, etc., or their growth numbers. Our small firms, on the other hand, if you look at the MSMEs and the micro component of the MSMEs in particular, they are clearly struggling. And liquidity is not the only concern. The market is also concerned with very low levels of demand. In fact, that is the reason that many of us were opposed right from the beginning of the pandemic to massive cash transfers as a means of increasing demand, because we have seen again in the richer nations where they have had massive stimulus in the form of cash transfers, etc., that people have not spent. I think in the midst of uncertainty and fear, you will see precautionary savings go up. People just hold on to their money. So, massive transfers are unlikely to translate into demand. And I think India was wise in terms of not doing that early on and keeping the focus where it was due, which is humanitarian. We really want to avoid a pandemic like this in India, where our health infrastructure is still quite limited, into becoming a massive humanitarian crisis.
Thank you. Dr. Parekh, as we close, I just want to ask you one question, which is purely the psychology of health. We are seeing some form of cynicism, some islands of cynicism are rising against the vaccines that have been produced by India. How do you visualize this? How safe are they? These are the questions being asked. What's your view on this?
Well, my perspective on it is the greater the level of transparency at all levels, whether it be government or whether it be pharmaceutical or whether it be in health policy, the less the cynicism. I mean, the greatest vaccine or even an antidote against cynicism is openness and transparency. This has happened for the past 250 years. I mean, not too many people know that within less than a decade of Edward Jenner inventing the vaccine for smallpox, there was widespread cynicism. It was a cowpox vaccine that was used, and there were people who were saying that it would make humans like cows. So this has been there. There were large-scale protests in the United States against smallpox vaccination. The US Supreme Court had to intervene at some point. So this, to some extent, is a part of our psyche. We are always afraid of the unknown. We are always skeptical of new things. But the best way to allay that is to have greater transparency.
That's all for today. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same place, but with a new issue and a new panel. Stay tuned. See you.